Well, good morning. Good to see you guys. My name is Nick Cox. Welcome to Community Christian Church. Great to be together this morning. In case we haven't had a chance to meet, let me introduce myself just a little bit. So I worked here on staff at CCC for about 7 years. Then after that, I went and became a marriage and family therapist. So I spend my days working with individuals and couples and families and trying to help them be as healthy as possible. And even though I am a guest speaker this morning, I am not a guest CCC. My family and I, we are members here. My wife, married for 18 years, got 3 kids, 14, 12, and 9, and we chase them all over the world. You know how that works if you got kids this time of year. And so I always love it when I get a chance to be here on Sunday morning. We are actually in the midst of a series called At the Core, where we've been talking about some of the core and deep aspects of what does it mean to live out of faith in Jesus? What does it mean to be a Christian? And it matters that we pay attention to some of these core fundamental dynamics of anything that's really important, even more so with something as vital as faith. And a couple weeks ago, we talked about paying attention to what we set our minds on. And last week, we talked about kind of the peace of God and what does that mean for the life of a Christian. And this morning, we're going to jump into another core factor of the Christian faith. And we're going to jump into the Bible in the book of Hebrews. And a little background about the book of Hebrews, because this is actually a letter that is written to a young church, right? So these are new followers of Jesus, and they're trying to figure out what that means. And they have a lot of challenges facing them coming from kind of different directions. And the government is not a huge fan of what's going on here, right? The Roman government, the emperor, they're not a big fan of other people saying that there is another king and another kingdom and other allegiances that are getting placed. So you can guess they're not a huge fan of this gathering of Christians. And the Jewish faith, they are not a fan of what's happening here, where the Jewish faith sees that Christians and Christianity and everything around that's all sacrilegious. That's all kind of like outside of how worship should happen or who God is. And so it's into this context that this letter is written to the people in this church. This is what we read. Hebrews 10. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, all the more as we see the day approaching. Right? So it's this idea of holding on unswervingly to our hope and not giving up meeting with one another, but spurring one another on, encouraging one another. What we're going to focus on is this aspect of faith of what does it mean and why do we gather together? Why do we meet together? Whether it's at church or at a small group, I think it's kind of at this point an accepted idea that one of the ways that faith is expressed is in gathering together, whether it's at church or with other people. But why? I mean, have you really thought about that? Why do we gather together? And I think it's actually a deceptively complicated question. There's lots of dynamics that go into it. But one of the significant reasons that we gather together, at the risk of saying something super simplistic, is there are some things that you cannot do by yourself that you can with other people. That's about as basic as it gets, right? There's some things you can only do with other folks. And so part of what we want to focus on and pay attention to today is, what does that mean? What is that dynamic of gathering together and community and relationship? What does that mean for our faith? Now, before we really dive in, let me take a quick second because I'd like to talk about what this verse we just read is not saying. Because I think sometimes it can be misused or misunderstood. This verse is not saying that anyone who is introverted or who enjoys some solitude or who genuinely finds themselves recharged on their own, they're not doing anything wrong. It's just how some people are built. And it's not saying that the gathering itself is somehow magical, that just getting together, it just makes magic happen. And it's not saying that we should gather together regardless of anything because if we gather, then that's where the magic happens. No. It's not saying that at all. It's not saying that if you miss a week of church, you're going to burn in Hades. This is not trying to add guilt or pressure onto what this is. What this verse is really trying to emphasize is that we were made to live interconnected lives with other people who care and love and support each other as they are attempting to follow after God. And that one of God's key mechanisms of offering that encouragement and support is the church, is the gathering of people who are following him together. Right? There's this time in the Bible where someone came up to Jesus and they asked him to summarize the Bible, summarize the Old Testament for us. And so they're asking him for the Cliff Notes version of it. And that got me thinking, does anyone under the age of 40 know what Cliff Notes are? Like, are Cliff Notes like a thing still? Like, I don't know. So basically, you come up and they ask him to write like a wiki for it or whatever. Like, they're asking him to like summarize this thing for us, Jesus. And this is what Jesus says when it just succinctly summarizes down what it's all about. Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and prophets hang on these two commandments, right? So he says all the law and the prophets. It's like the Old Testament, all that dynamic of the Jewish faith, it all hangs on two things. Love God. And everyone's like, yep, we can get along with that one. Like, that one's understandable. You'd think that would be on the list. The second one is kind of like a 1B, and it's love other people. Love other people. Love God, love other people. See, the core aspect that the Bible is making really clear is that we cannot live out the Christian faith by ourselves. We just can't. The New Testament portion of the Bible is originally written in Greek, right? And there's this Greek word I want to draw our attention to, because it's used in the New Testament portion of the Bible 100 times, over 100 times, which is not a small number. If something is said over and over again 100 times, I hope you pay attention to it, right? Over and over and over again. Over 50 of these times, it's given in the form of a command, something that we are told to do. And it's the Greek word alelon. And it means one another. Right, this little Greek word, it's over and over again. It's about how to treat one another. What does the one another dynamic look like in the Bible? Let me zip through a bunch of examples here. Be at peace with each other. Love one another. Honor one another. Live in harmony with one another. Stop passing judgment on one another. Accept one another. Instruct one another. Serve one another. Carry each other's burdens. Be patient. Bearing in love with one another. Be kind and compassionate to one another. Submit to one another. In humility, consider others better than yourselves. Do not lie to each other. Bear with each other. Forgive one another. Admonish one another. Encourage one another. Pray for one another. You're getting the idea, right? There's lots of these. We could go on for the rest of our time just listing out the dynamics of how we are told to interact with one another. And the part I don't want you to miss is it is impossible to fully follow God alone. It is impossible to fully follow God alone. You can't do it. I don't care if you're a sixth grader or the great-grandparent of a sixth grader. You cannot follow God alone. If we're going to take the Bible seriously, if we're going to attempt to follow the instructions of Jesus, then we need to understand this core principle of Christian faith is that it exists in community with other people and in community with other believers. Sometimes you'll hear people say something like, I'm spiritual, but I don't really, do the church thing. Or I have faith, but it's just kind of for me. That is incompatible with the Christian faith. You don't have the permission to just kind of do your own faith thing. There are over 100 ways that we are told to interact with one another. And we don't often think about faith that way. Not really, right? We don't often think about faith in the context of our relationships with other people. But in order to follow God fully, there needs to be an other, right? You can't do one another unless there's an other. But our tendency, I think, is to become a little bit more individually focused. And our world kind of drives us in that direction. Look, I am a fan of technology. I enjoy technology. I use technology. But you and I both know that as much as we might be connected to a broader world, we may have never felt more isolated and lonely. Right? I can order my groceries and have them delivered to my door and then have a meeting with someone in Tokyo, and yet I can still be deeply disconnected from my world. I bet you there's some people in here who know what it feels like to be connected electronically but disconnected in relationship. And just feel isolated. Just feel that loneliness. But God makes it clear that those who choose to follow him, we do it in the midst of community and relationship. And look, I'm a fan of podcasts and audiobooks. I'm a fan of online sermons. I mean, this right now is being streamed online, right? Like, I'm not against any of those things. But if we believe that watching a sermon online and learning a few things and being intellectually stimulated or hearing a song that stirs us is a same thing and a replacement for community and relationship, I believe we are being naive. It is in the midst of community and relationship where our full expression of faith in Jesus can exist. Jesus himself modeled this. Right? This is how he lived his life. Right? Jesus, the Son of God, the Almighty, gathered friends to be near him when he lived. We read it this way. He appointed 12 that they might be with him and he might send them out to preach. Right? He gathers these close friends so that they can be with him, so that he can love and care for them and receive their love and care in return. There was a time the night before Jesus was crucified and he was just in the darkest place of his life. And he asked these people to be near him, to pray with him, to comfort him. He didn't want to be alone, and he understood that that's how people were made. We need that kind of community. And yet sometimes we are tempted to go at it alone. Now, this young church that's receiving this letter, I don't know why some people might be giving up meeting together. I don't know exactly what's happening there where people might be, kind of not encouraging one another, not kind of taking the time to meet with one another. But I think we can make an educated guess because people are people and they're going to do people things. Maybe they stop meeting together because it just doesn't feel as significant or as exciting as it used to. Like maybe initially it was a lot of fun and really exciting, but then it kind of, the shine comes off the apple a little bit. I mean, it was vibrant when it started, but now, it just doesn't hit like it used to. The last time they went, it wasn't even the main guy speaking, it was some substitute. Maybe in this church there's this increasing kind of social pressure to kind of fit in. Right? This gathering of Christians, it was like this ragtag group. There were women, there were slaves, there were tax collectors. It was just, if we're being honest, anybody who showed up was allowed to be a part of it. And man, that's a tough look if you're kind of paying attention to what other people think about you. Maybe they didn't really mean to give up gathering together at all. Maybe it was just the busyness of life. Maybe it was the constant tug of obligations and responsibilities. Maybe they didn't mean to put it on the back burner, it just ended up there. Let's be honest, it's not their fault that their kids' soccer is on Sunday morning. I think there's a handful of common reasons why all of us might be tempted to stop giving up meeting. We might give up meeting with each other. We might become disconnected. And I think we need to take a little bit of a gut check on this. I think we need to understand, are we kind of maybe slipping into some of these kinds of tendencies? Because again, I don't think people take flying leaps into being less healthy. We take one step at a time into it. One of the reasons why I think some people will give up gathering together is because we don't think we need it. I don't mean to oversimplify things. I think there's just some people who are convinced that it's not that big of a deal. I'm not really giving up that much if I'm not connecting with church or if I'm not part of a small group. This passage in Hebrews, we're not talking about someone who didn't go to church for a week or who missed a week of their small group. The danger that we're talking about is not a decision or a moment. We're talking about their patterns. People drift away when they stop showing up. And what are they missing? Well, part of what this verse says, that what they're missing is being able to be spurred on toward good deeds, spurred on toward love, right? Receiving the encouragement and support of others. Right? This idea of holding unswervingly to our faith, they spur on each other. Let's look at another Greek word. We're going to be bilingual by the end of the day here. Another Greek word, that word for spur, it's paraximos. Paraximos, it sounds like a side character from Gladiator, but paraximos. What it means is to provoke, to stir up, to irritate, to exasperate. This is a word that's used in sources outside of the Bible to describe what it's like for a horse who has a burr under their saddle. Right? So if you see a horse has a saddle on, and let's say there's like a thorn or a burr under it, and it's this constant irritant to the horse. It's uncomfortable. It's not a great experience. And I bet you we all can envision a situation where a person might provoke someone else, maybe to anger or to a fight. Right? I have 3 kids, so I'm keenly familiar with what it looks like when 2 people are irritating themselves to the point of conflict. Not sure if you've ever seen this before. I have seen this before. And it's interesting that the writer of Hebrews takes this word for irritant, for exasperation, for annoyance, and he applies it to spurring each other on toward good deeds, spurring each other toward good things. So much so that it's impossible not to notice it. It's impossible for it not to just be this pervasive quality of what it is like inside of that place and inside of that community. I don't know, have you ever had the experience before where you have a little cut on your finger and you don't realize it until you cut a lemon or pick a crab or cut a jalapeno, and all of a sudden it's oh, hey, that's there. I didn't know that was there. And it's not like it's enough pain to knock you over, but whoo, there's no ignoring it, right? It becomes it's just the constant dynamic of the experience. Imagine what it would look like if there was a community of people and the ways that they encouraged each other, and the ways that they valued each other, and the ways that they spurred each other into good deeds was so overwhelming you couldn't ignore it even if you tried. It was so pervasive, it was such a part of who they were that it just kind of bled out of every pore. It's like having a cut and cutting a lemon. Like there's no denying that you'd experience that. Could you imagine what it would be like in the challenges of following after God to have people surrounding you with the love and the support and the care and the encouragement to push you forward, to encourage you forward, to annoy you forward into good deeds and into love? And so I guess the challenge I'd toss your way is, do you have people like that in your world? Do you have those people? Do you have people who are willing to you're vulnerable enough with that they know where they need to maybe spur you on toward love or good deeds? Do people know you well enough to know where you need encouragement? Are you offering encouragement to other people? Are you available for other people's availabilities? Are you available for their vulnerabilities? Do you show up to them? Do you let them show up for you? I think another reason that some people fail to meet with each other or they kind of give up on gathering together is it doesn't fit their priorities. Now, this is not normally how we articulate it, but the real truth is that we prioritize the things that we will invest in first. Right? Like, you know those signs that are in front of churches sometimes, and they'll like change them out and like put little messages or puns on them every now and then? I remember driving by one a while ago, and the message that was in front, and it said, "Live what you believe." My argument is, we all do. We might not live what we profess we believe. We might not live what we say we believe. We might not live what we want to believe. I claim that we all live what we actually believe. What we actually value, what we actually prioritize, what we actually hold close to us, yeah, we live that stuff out every single time. Because if someone doesn't spend their time or their energy or their focus or their money on something, then it is not that important to them. If you met someone and they said they're a big Ravens fan, I'm a big Ravens fan. Man, I bleed purple and black. I love it. Oh, man, that's so cool. Do you have season tickets? Nah, I mean, I don't think I would want to spend my money on that. Oh, yeah, man, I get that. So do you go to games sometimes? Ooh, I haven't been to a game in like years. Maybe like 10 years since I've been to a game. Oh, do you watch all the games? Not really. Not really. Don't really watch them. I mean, do you like watch the highlights? Do you read anything about them? No, I mean, not really, but I'm a huge fan. No, you're not. Like, no, you're not. If you're not willing to invest your time and your energy and your focus and your attention and your resources, if you're not willing to invest in it, then you can say as much as you want that it matters, but your life proves out that it doesn't. It is not a priority. And we can get to the place where we get to this spot where we have competing priorities, and we can only choose one of them. We're like, man, church matters to me. It really matters to me to gather together. But it also matters to me to stay up really late on Saturday, and I kind of enjoy that a lot, which means I really enjoy sleeping in on Sunday. So, like sometimes I just don't choose that. Or you know what, church really matters to me, but my kids are involved in so much stuff. And there's so many activities and sports, and there's all kinds of things to go to. So, it's like it's just not that, I'll just pick the kids stuff. I really want to get into a small group. That really sounds good. I really want to invest with that and kind of surround myself with people. But, work right now, it's kicking my butt. And there's a lot of stuff going on. So maybe someday, but not now. Look, you and I both know that the thing that you feed first is the thing you value most. And when you're in a place where there's competing priorities, what you choose will reveal to you what you prioritize. If you want to, you can take a gut check at this. You could take a gut check and you could see how often are you choosing and canceling one thing over another. Because the thing you cancel is less important to you. The thing that doesn't happen, it's less important. Do you cancel things and protect time to make sure you're gathering with other people? Do you cancel things or shift your schedule around to make sure there's space for you to offer and receive encouragement from other folks? How often is your relationship with one another and your faith in God prioritized above other things? If you want to, you can take a little inventory here. Our culture is going to consistently push us to overschedule and to overbook and to overcommit and to overstimulate and to overwhelm until it just feels like we are just over our heads. And if you do not have the ability or you don't choose to have the ability to set things aside to prioritize the gathering together and the relationships with people, they will not happen. It's not magic. So I encourage you to take that kind of self-inventory. What are the priorities that you're investing yourself in? I think another reason that some people maybe stop gathering together is because they believe that what they're struggling with kind of disqualifies them. That I'm struggling with something uniquely in a way that makes it so man, they wouldn't want me there anyhow. Like, I don't have much to offer. I don't have much to give. I can't really be a part of it because I'm just kind of messed up. I'm a counselor. I'm one of these fortunate people who love their careers. If you're a person who loves your career, you know how much of a blessing that is. I love my career. I love what I do. And every now and then when I'm sitting across from somebody, you get to see this moment where they realize that what they're struggling with is not unique. It's an interesting moment when you see someone and they realize, it's not just me. I remember when I was first starting, this is like week 2, right? Just starting at this whole counseling thing, and I was meeting with a couple, and I'm a little nervous, and I'm in my own head, and I'm trying to do the best I can, and the guy looks at me, he goes, "You've been doing this a long time?" And I'm like, "Oh no, I've done something dumb. I must have screwed something up." I started kind of "Oh no, what did I say?" And then he says, "Are we like the worst couple you've seen?" And it wasn't about me. It wasn't about me. He was worried that they were uniquely broken. He was worried that there was something uniquely wrong. There is a unique struggle. There is a unique pain. Your pain, as severe and as significant as it can be, is not unique. I'll tell people, you're broken in the regular old way. You're broken like the rest of us. You are not broken in such a way that disqualifies you from the community of God. You're not broken in such a way that makes it so that you cannot be part of what it means to gather together with other people. Look, this is a place of fellow strugglers. This is a place of fellow limping down the road, trying to make this work kind of people. If you struggle, welcome. You're in the right spot. Because we all are. But what happens is that if we don't surround ourselves with other people who also are struggling and striving, if we don't surround ourselves with people who are also trying to move toward really worthwhile goals, it's so easy to quit. It's so easy to just convince ourselves that, I must be uniquely wrong. One of the first signs that someone's struggling is they stop showing up. When someone's struggling with their faith, or struggling when they've been hurt, or struggling with something that's impacted their world, people stop showing up. It's an interesting reaction that humans have when we hurt. Sometimes we will just isolate ourselves. We'll pull away. It's an interesting dynamic. If you look at when people choke at a restaurant, if people die from choking at a restaurant, they almost always are found in the bathroom because they will excuse themselves from the table, whether it's because they're embarrassed, whether they think they can solve it themselves, or because they just don't, they're not sure what to do at this moment, and they remove themselves from the very people who could help them. They remove themselves from the very connections that could have saved part of their life. Let us not give up meeting together. Some are the habit of doing, but encourage one another all the more as they see the day approaching. Man, we need that kind of encouragement. I think all of us do. No one is immune to needing that kind of encouragement. You need it. I need it. It's hard. Have you ever noticed how some of the best stuff in life is the hardest stuff? Have you noticed that? Whether it's a marriage or having kids or having a really fulfilling career or a faith that is deep and meaningful, some of the best stuff is the hardest stuff. And some of the hardest stuff you just can't do on your own. You just can't. I've never met someone in my life who has said, "Man, I'm just too encouraged." I wish people in my world would be less encouraging. It's just too much. My spouse and my friends and my small group are man, I wish they would just knock it off every now and then. No. Never. It has never happened. Because we starve for it. Because it leaks out of us. Even when we receive encouragement, we're like a colander, man. It just leaks right on out of us. And if we're not careful, and if we're not surrounded by people that we're pouring into as they pour into us, we will run dry. My wife and I, we moved about 6-7 years ago. And there's some moments. Have you ever had these moments where you realize you're getting old? I had one of these moments where I realized I'm getting old. Because I was so excited to get a riding mower. I was so excited. I've always had these little postage stamp yards, and now it's not a huge yard, but it's a yard that needs mowing. And so I got a riding mower. I've always been frugal. That's one word for it. And so I got a used mower, and it was, I was so excited. And so I'd ride around this thing, and I don't pretend to have a lot of riding mower experience, but I figured it out. I'm very proud of myself. It's not hard. You just steer. And so I was riding it. But then one day, there was this crunch. And then there's this grind, and I'm like, well, I'm just going to keep going. I mean, like, whatever, let's just push through, right? Like, let's persevere here. Turns out that the mower I had has this really interesting feature where there's this valve on the side, and it is intended to make changing the oil easier. It also turns out that if you hit a rock really hard, it makes all the oil leak out of the engine, right? Okay, not the way I would have designed it, but this is the way that this was designed. I apparently hit something rather solid, knocked off that little cap, and the oil, unbeknownst to me, started leaking out. Do you know what happens to a lawnmower when you run it without oil in its engine for a while? It dies hard, too, man. It doesn't even die easy. That sucker locks on up. It just stops working. But it leaked, and it leaked, and it leaked. And I wasn't paying attention, and I didn't know it was leaking, so I didn't know it was running dry, and then it stopped working. And that's all of us. That is a miserable way to break a lawnmower. It is a worse way to break a life, where it leaks, and it leaks, and it leaks. Who pours back into you? Where do you find your encouragement? Who do you pour into? Who do you offer your encouragement to? Man, we need this stuff. We need it. Earlier in that same book of Hebrews, in Hebrews 3, this is what we read. But encourage one another day after day, as long as it is called today, so that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. I love that. As long as it's called today. Because that's all we got. Tomorrow is a myth. We never get there. Have you ever noticed that? We never get to tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. Tomorrow's a myth. We only ever have today. So as long as it's today, offer that encouragement to each other, day after day after day. The reality is that none of us in here can do it alone. There is no person who has the ability to live a complete Christian life in isolation. It is not how it works. Not a single one of us. And so I hope that you'll check in with yourself. Who are you connected with? Who are you vulnerable with? Who do you allow yourself to have someone else be vulnerable to you? Where are you finding encouragement? Where are you pouring out encouragement? That is the kind of place this church dreams to be. That's the kind of small groups we dream to have, where the connection and the relationships are so intertwined and healthy that, man, we are just spurring each other on to the best of things. One of those other one another phrases is about communion. It says, whenever they would gather together, they would break bread with one another. Right? Whenever they'd gather together, whenever there was this gathering of people focused on their faith in Jesus, gathered together on moving after God, they would celebrate communion together. They would break bread, which means one person was close enough to another person to hold a piece of bread, and the other person would break it. And they would remember that the body of Jesus was broken for them, that Jesus, the Son of God, came and he taught and he healed, and ultimately he was killed by being crucified on a cross, and his body was broken for us. And they would drink and remember that this is in remembrance of the blood that was spilled, that Jesus' blood that could pay a price that we can't pay, that could pay a debt that we could never pay, that was for them. And then together, as a gathering of people, they would remember that with one another. And whenever we gather together, we do the same thing. When we gather, we celebrate communion to remember that all of this is through Jesus. Without Jesus, none of this makes any sense. Without Jesus, none of this is even relevant. And we eat bread to remember his body that was broken for us. And we drink juice to remember his blood that was spilled for us. And we take time to remember that this community of people are trying to follow after Jesus together. There's little cups in the back of the room. If you didn't grab one of them on the way in, just a minute, the lights will go down, and you can kind of head on back there, and in that cup is a piece of bread and some juice. We're going to spend some time to remember and reflect on the sacrifice of Jesus. Let's pray together. God, I pray that you will help us to avoid the temptation of going at it alone. I pray that you would help us avoid the temptation to just carry things all by ourselves. I pray that we would take a chance and take the risk, that we would connect ourselves within a community of people so that you could guide us into the place that we need to be, so we could experience your love through the love of other people, and that we can pour out on others what they need as well. And we thank you for this church as we strive to become that kind of place. And I pray that this time will be a time that we remember that it is only through your sacrifice that we are made whole. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.